last U.S. combat brigade in Iraq has left the country, a move that helps U.S. President Barack Obama reach his goal of 50,000 troops in the country by September 1st. Colonel John Norris, the head of the 4,000-strong brigade, the combat brigade, told his soldiers last night, quote, "Operation Iraqi Freedom ends on your watch," end quote. The State Department has taken the responsibility for training the Iraqi police, a task that will mostly be carried out by 6,000 to 7,000 security contractors to form into so-called quick reaction forces, ostensibly to protect civilians. It's going to cost about $1.5 billion to set up the additional embassy offices. This is a building, the size of the Vatican? Plus the hiring and training of security contractors. Police training programs cost about $800 million. You know, this is kind of bizarre news given how the tragic state of infrastructure in America, but nonetheless, this is what Barack Obama inherited from George W. Bush. Just consider for a moment how different this outcome would be, albeit imperfect and cosmetic, from what we'd have if there was a Republican in the White House. Or would it be different? We may be, frankly, in my opinion, we may be moving slowly, but at least we're moving in the right direction. By the way, in our second hour today, we are going to get into the whole issue of internet gambling. It is moving closer and closer. Barney Frank has come out gung-ho in favor of this. There's a huge debate going on. And in our third hour, our right-wing talk radio responsible for the murder of a couple of police officers right here in my hometown in Portland, Oregon. We're going to be talking with Kari Chisholm about that. But right now, let's talk about Iraq for a moment. Matt Duss is with us. He's with Think Progress. He's an editor over at National Security Editor, in fact, at the Center for American Progress, AmericanProgress.org and ThinkProgress.org. And, hey, Matt, welcome to the program.
Thanks very much.
My guess is that most Republicans don't believe this war is over because the president hasn't stuffed a sock in his pants and given a speech on an aircraft carrier. I'm curious your take on the whole thing.
Well, I think, I think it's more a milestone for Americans than it is for Iraqis at this point. As numerous reports have noted, there's still over 50,000 American troops in Iraq right now, and despite the fact that we're now calling them advisors instead of combat troops, they're still heavily armed soldiers. Yeah.
On the other hand, we still have troops in Japan and Germany and South Korea, and I mean, and I'm not saying that glibly. I realize it could come off that way. But it really, those 50,000 troops really could be one thing or another. They could be something like, those remnant troops who are basically there to stage against an area, an entire region, or they could be an occupying force. What's your sense of what they are?
I think that's quite true, but I think if you look at, say, last year when we saw the withdrawal of U.S. troops from cities and towns into bases, and we saw just an outpouring of celebration from the Iraqis. I mean, even the Iraqi government noted that. They called that a holiday, Iraqi Sovereignty Day. Mm-hmm. We're just not seeing anything like that. I mean, since then, U.S. troops have been largely confined to their bases. They've gone out. When they've gone out with, in partnership with Iraqi forces, and so that will continue now. As I said, I think it is an important milestone for the U.S. I think it's very important that President Obama is, continuing. He's honoring and holding to the drawdown agreement. But yeah, I think we should recognize it, but we should also recognize it means more to Americans than it might to Iraqis at this point.
What's your sense of where we'd be at right now, Matt Duss? Duss, right? Am I
pronouncing
it? Okay. If John McCain had been elected president.
Well, I think John McCain made pretty clear that he was committed and very interested in maintaining Iraq as a staging ground for the continued use of American force in the Middle East. Right. He was very. This was one of the main ideas driving the invasion of Iraq was let's a presence in a significant centrally located Middle Eastern country from which the United States could extend its power wherever, whenever we wanted to. That didn't quite work out, but I think if John McCain had become president, we would at the very least have seen much more resistance from the administration, from a McCain administration, to following the drawdown as planned, and probably more attempts to try to renegotiate the drawdown agreement. And still we see many McCain supporters now saying that President Obama should be trying to do that, but I think that's simply a non-starter as far as the Iraqis are concerned.
Back in 2002, a right-wing think tank group down in Florida sued the Bush administration, oddly enough, under the Freedom of Information Act, for information about Dick Cheney's energy panel meetings, energy commission or whatever it was called. Cheney was given two jobs when Bush took office. One was to have a national security committee or commission, and the other was the Energy Commission. And the Energy Commission, of course, met several times with the oil executives and whatnot. The national security one didn't meet until about a week before 9/11. But when this lawsuit happened, they actually obtained documents from the very first meeting, which was in March of 2001, long before 9/11, where the Bush administration and Cheney specifically in this energy conference or meeting was carving up the oil fields of Iraq. They had, there's almost 100 of them or over 100 of them. They had them named. They had specific governments and specific companies in specific countries that were potential purchasers for them. It was all as if, post. And now, I've been following these stories in the Financial Times over the last 6 months. Shell Oil just bought one, and, ExxonMobil, I think, just bought one. And what do you say to those people who say, okay, we got the oil fields. We got that famous quote from Dick Cheney. I don't know if you've got that, Jacob, where he says Iraq has 10% of the world's oil. This was before. Here it is. This was before.
Iraq sits on top of 10% of the world's oil reserves. Very significant reserve, second only to Saudi Arabia.
So, we've got the oil and we've sold it off, and mission accomplished.
Well, I think, whenever you're talking about the Middle East, oil is always a factor. I think, we all need to recognize that. Frankly, I tend to be skeptical of the claim that we went there for the oil for a number of reasons. One of them being, I think if the Bush administration had really gone there for the oil, they'd have done a much better job of actually getting it.
But that was the first thing they secured, was the oil ministry.
Right. I recognize that. I do. You've had competitive bidding. I think it's true that American companies have gone in there, or quote-unquote American multinationals have gone in there, and they've done quite well for themselves. But I think as I said, oil always plays a factor here, though. I think it's important not to make too much of it. I think, there are plans being drawn up for all kinds of things at any given time. It's not surprising to me at all, given Cheney's background in Halliburton, et cetera, that he would have been involved in something like this. So it's important to note it, but it's also important, I think, not to make too much of it.
Right. 4,415 members of the U.S. military have lost their lives in Iraq. This is an enormous sacrifice, not to mention what's probably going to end up being a $3 trillion bill when all is said and done, and when all the veterans have been, by the time the last veteran dies, the cost of all the treatments from PTSD to amputees. In the minute we have left, Matt Duss is with us with the Center for American Progress, thinkprogress.org. In the minute we have left, your thoughts on the meaning now of this war and how we're going to look back on it 10, 15 years from now, the way we now look back on Vietnam?
Well, I think it's important that you do note the PTSD. 4,000 deaths, but also that's 4 or 5 times many as that wounded and maimed, and many, many times that who will suffer from mental difficulties for the rest of their lives. And all those people will be and should be taken care of by the American taxpayers. But, that's one legacy. But another is, and an equally troubling legacy is, this war was conceived, I think, by the Bush administration as an attempt to demonstrate the extent of America's power after 9/11, and it succeeded, in my view, only in demonstrating the limits of that power. And that, I think, we're going to be struggling with the implications of that for decades to come. I think there's something very valuable in people kind of suspecting that you are powerful, and there's an important deterrent effect to that, the idea that America could act if it wanted to, but demonstrating how we were constrained in the face of an Iraq insurgency, I think is going to have very, very negative implications in the future.
Matt, that's one of the most profound and insightful commentaries I have ever encountered on this. Thank you so much for sharing it with us.
Thank you.
Matt Duss, Center for American Progress, thinkprogress.org, their blog, americanprogress.org, the main website, editor over at American Progress. Thanks, Matt. For more on this and other topics, please visit thomhartmann.com.